I love crying. I love sadness. I love emotional pain. And I just can't for the life of me understand why others don't share my perspective. And I'm well aware that most people don't. My friends, my family, my wife, I'm assuming most people who watch the channel, when they see someone in pain, someone crying, someone going through something emotional, they perceive that as a bad thing. To me, I perceive all those things as a very, very, very good thing. But before I explain why, I want to kind of make a quick differentiation. There is physical pain and there is emotional pain. What I'm talking about today is emotional pain, sadness, crying, anything within that realm. Yes, I also believe there is tremendous value to physical pain because you can learn a lot from that, especially when it's something you've chosen, such as, I'm going to challenge myself. Let's say I'm going to run ultra marathon. Yes, there's a lot of physical pain involved with that, and pushing yourself past your limits, you can learn a lot from that. But I've already spoken about that a lot in the past. I believe, but I haven't spoken as much about, my love of emotional pain. And as weird as that sounds, there's a very, very logical reason for that. It's because for me, I've trained myself to use that pain, to use crying, to use sadness as a way of releasing it. Because the way I like to think about it, it's like, all right, imagine, sadness as a bird that got into your house and it's trying to get out. What does it do? Most of the time, it's going to try to fly out, bang into the window, and fail, obviously, to get out because of that. And try that over and over and over again because it's the only way it understands how to get out. And as a result of that, your attention keeps getting drawn to that pain because you're not processing it. So it's the same with a pain, a thought. Let's use the example in my last video. That's the reason why I'm talking about this. In my last video, I asked myself a simple question. What if I never get to meet my children? And that caused me sadness. That caused me emotional pain. It caused me to cry. But I don't see that as a bad thing because if I ignored it or tried to, that pain, that, metaphorical bird would keep smashing into that window trying to get out and it would never be able to. So my attention would keep getting drawn to that and the sadness that's attached to that would keep coming back over and over and over again. Whereas if I allow myself to, one, experience it, but two, really put myself in a situation where I maximize that. So a lot of the times when I feel like I need to process something, and it's something sad as an example, I'm going to listen to sad music. I'm going to find a song that just touches me, that elicits that emotion, and I'm going to listen to it on repeat, sometimes for hours on end. And I'm going to cry, and I'm going to be sad, and I'm going to process it, and it's going to suck in the moment. But after that, I always feel amazing because it's like the equivalent of opening that window, letting that bird out. The bird flies free, and you never really hear from it again. Whereas if you keep the window closed, it just keeps banging and banging and banging into that window, and the sadness that's attached to that, you keep being reminded of that. So I much prefer being very sad for an intense short period of time than opening that window and letting it out, than being reminded and being slightly less intensely sad, but having that happen over and over and over again. That's why I love crying. That's why I love being sad. I love that emotional pain, if you will. Not because I'm a masochist, because that is my way of releasing that, of processing that, because I know myself. It's like, I like to make puns. And if I think of a pun and I don't say it, it's gonna stay stuck in my head. And it's going to go back in that loop over and over and over and over again until I have another opportunity to let it out, to say it. It's that same principle. That process of crying, of being sad, of being in emotional pain, and having that be really, really intense is my way of opening that window. It's my way of making that pun just to get it out of my head. It's also one of the reasons why I used to write books. Because I think of a story, I think of characters, I think of ideas and everything. I'm like, oh, that would be really cool. And if I didn't write it down, if I didn't get it out, it would just stay stuck there and I keep thinking about it and thinking about it and thinking about it. And that is why I love pain. That is why I love crying. That is why I love sadness. And a lot of people don't understand that. So to me, yesterday's video, where I cried beforehand, I cried a bit in the video, it seemed very sad, and it was in the moment. But that's just it. It was momentary. It was me processing, me releasing that pain. And now I feel great. Yesterday, after a couple hours of processing and everything I needed to do, I felt great. And that's the beauty of it. I've trained myself to be able to go through that process and get to the point where it's like, all right, I released it, I'm free from it. Maybe at some point it's going to come back. Maybe a bird's going to get back into the house and I'm going to have to let it out again. That's okay. It's not like, oh, I got rid of it, it's gone forever, I don't need to worry about it. It may come back, I'm aware of that, that's okay. But it's just, it keeps me from becoming obsessed and living in that state by being able to do that. And that's why that's why I say that, as insane as it sounds. That's why I say I love emotional pain, I love crying, I love sadness and everything. And unfortunately, it's hard for a lot of people to understand that because most people aren't like me. Most people haven't, learned that skill or trained themselves to be this way, to be able to release that. So to them, it's just like, the pressure builds up and builds up and builds up and it gets to the point where they just like break down and cry and they're miserable and it sucks. And that kind of like lowers the pressure, but it still stays there because they haven't allowed themselves to release it. So the pressure is eventually going to go back up and they're going to go through the same thing again until it goes down and then it's going to go back up and down and it just never ends. So that's why I believe most people perceive sadness and crying and emotional pain as a bad thing, whereas me, I see it as an amazing thing if you know how to use it. And I've trained myself to be able to use it. Same thing for, physical pain. That's why I challenge myself so much. That's why I went through that process of falling in love with fear, doing the things that scare you. Because if you do the things that scare you often enough, you realize, oh, it's really not that hard. It's really not that scary. And you're able to release that fear. Same thing for if you're afraid of being in physical pain, by pushing yourself to your limit and being in that pain, and realizing, okay, even when I'm in pain, I can still push myself. It's not it's not the end of the world. You're able to release that. You're not afraid of that pain anymore. And it's the same thing for emotional pain. A lot of people are afraid of sadness. They try to avoid that because they perceive it as a bad thing. And as a result of that, there's always that underlying fear. It's always there. The issue never gets resolved and it just keeps coming back and coming back and coming back. So to me, I much prefer being very, very sad, very intensely sad and crying and feeling horrible and having the worst day ever. Knowing that is allowing me to process it, to release that, so that the next day, the next week, the next month, year, or whatever is going to be much better after that. That is how I've conditioned myself. That is how I like to live my life. And that's why I say I love crying. I love being sad. I love, to suffer. And in a way, that is what I'm going through with this whole cancer thing. It's like, yes, there's physical pain, but physically there hasn't been that much. There were intense periods, yes. But most of the pain I've gone through and experienced is that emotional pain of like, hey, am I going to die? what if I never get to be with my wife? What if I never get to meet my children? Like there's a lot of pain and sadness that comes from asking yourself those types of questions. But at the same time, if I'm able to understand at some point, I'm going to look back and be so grateful for this. And that knowledge allows me, most of the time, not always, it's more difficult with physical pain or when it's really, really intense and it lasts for longer periods of time. But most of the time, knowing that allows me in the moment to be grateful for what I'm going through because I know it's exactly what I need to experience to be able to release this pain, to grow as a person, and to learn what I need to learn. So, yeah, just wanted to share that because I feel like a lot of people perceived yesterday's video as like, oh man, he's going through a really hard time. And that's not it. Like, most things are going really well. That's why I haven't made as many videos lately. There's just nothing to talk about. Yesterday happened to be a difficult day for a few hours, and I processed that, and you happen to see that portion. But overall, like, things are great. I processed what I needed to process. I feel awesome. I don't feel sad. I'm optimistic. I know everything's going to be great. And I just thought it was important to share that, just to make sure that you don't misunderstand, because that's the problem with YouTube. That's a problem with, any kind of format where you're sharing and you can't really have a conversation. It's just like people get a perception of what you're going through. It's like, there's this entire picture, but all you're seeing is like this tiny hole, like this tiny vision you can see through this tiny hole. So it's like, I just want to make sure that you understand, like, yeah, okay, there was a period of a couple hours yesterday. It was really intense. It sucked. I was sad. I was crying. But I'm so grateful to have gone through that. So hopefully this all made sense. And, I hope you don't suffer, but at the same time, if you're able to use that to process it, to release it, well, then I kind of do hope you suffer. So, thank you for watching. Hopefully, you didn't take that last comment in a bad way. And I'll talk to you at some point in the future.